according to reports, the IDF controls about 70% of the territory so far. This would be a complete takeover, making Israel responsible for every single person living in Gaza. Is this a good idea?
I think that the status quo is untenable. So the decision here is either withdraw or complete the takeover. And look, if we want to not delay the goal of defeating Hamas, if we want to not kick that can down the road, then there's no other way to do that. Because, first of all, Hamas still has massive control of the population in those areas where it operates from. It's still hijacking aid, and it's still continuing to basically make negotiations for a partial deal impossible. It has turned down every offer for a partial deal and a ceasefire. So the ball has been thrown back to Israel, and Israel has got to decide whether it's going to just leave the Gaza Strip in the hope of an overall deal, or whether it's going to complete the takeover. Those were the only two options really on the table. Now, if we want to talk about setting up an alternative autonomy in the future, of a Hamas-free Gaza, all of those things have to travel through the choke point of taking over the entire Strip. This is the most basic military doctrine, is taking over the enemy's area, clearing it of the enemy, and then setting up a substitute civilian administration. I haven't seen any other doctrine in the world that can defeat an enemy of the kind of Hamas without taking those steps. Obviously, there are very, very major concerns about the safety of the hostages in this kind of situation. I've talked in the past about the scenario of conducting localized negotiations with the hostage takers. Perhaps that would become more realistic in cutting Qatar and Hamas and Qatar out of the equation. Obviously, this is a very scary moment for the hostages, the families, and all of us who are worried about their safety. But when you look at the net national security assessment, the two options are leave Gaza or complete the takeover. There are no other options on the table.
All right, thank you, Yaakov. Let me bring in Ahmed. Ahmed, the talks have stalled. I mean, they've pretty much run their course. Hamas refuses to disarm. No one else can disarm Hamas other than the IDF. What other options does Israel have to end this war and stop the deaths of Palestinians, essentially?
Well, the problem is, why is this being brought up right now as an option almost 2 years into the war? This may have been a viable option at the beginning of the war, right after October 7th, when Israel had the hundreds of thousands of reservists mobilized and ready to go. But 2 years into the conflict and the war, the population, almost the entirety of the people of Gaza, have been squeezed into Hamas-controlled territory in the central camps in Nusayrat and Deir al-Balah. And I mean, I feel like we've been set up to get to this point by the failure of the Israeli government's decision-making matrix. My biggest, one of the many concerns that I have, in addition to the safety of what remains of my family, those who haven't been killed already, my brother who's on the ground in there, my many friends who are anti-Hamas, who are ready for the opportunity to rise up and actually create a new future, is that this is going to facilitate the reintroduction of settlements. We know that there are these supremacist parties that are camped outside of Gaza that are waiting for an occupation to facilitate their return to Gaza. So that's one concern, in addition to concern over the lives of the hostages. But also, is Israel going to actually start? Is the IDF going to be in the business of handing out food and medical supplies to the Palestinian population? What's going to replace the infamous Hamas-run health ministry? The IDF, I think, is incapable of running Gaza's humanitarian affairs. And those are the questions that I feel like have to be married to any questions about the military strategy of the impending occupation.
Okay. Ahmed makes some good points. Yaakov, Palestinians are concerned that when they hear from people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich talking about taking away their land, they will be permanently displaced. And also, from a security perspective, can you have IDF soldiers, Israelis, on the ground in close contact with Gazans to give them food and aid and everything else that entails an occupation?
Yeah, look, Ahmed raises important questions. Here's the way I see it, at least. First of all, regarding the idea of settlements, that has not been a directive of the cabinet. It is absolutely off the table. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that it's off the table. So, yeah, sure, there are some in Israel who would want to see a reintroduction of the settlements that were uprooted during the disengagement. It's not a government directive, so we can talk about it all day, but as long as it's not a government directive, it's not actually happening. Now, in terms of the really important question of aid distribution, we have a model. It's called the GHF. It's not perfect. It had many hiccups along the way. It managed to distribute over 100 million meals over the past 2 months, with far, far, far less Hamas theft and hijacking than anything that the UN was ever able to introduce, and no scenes of truckloads of aid not being picked up by the UN, leaving Gazans with food insecurity in those areas that Hamas still controls and uses them as human shields. So at the end of the day, if we want to solve the aid distribution without allowing Hamas to reconstitute itself, the only way to do that is to expand programs like the GHF. They can be the ones who hand out the food. They can learn and improve as they go. They would be protected by the IDF. Absolutely, the protection would be down to the IDF. That's already the situation in southern Gaza and in central Gaza. And that would be expanded, presumably, with improvements as things go along, because it's critical to get that humanitarian aid into the hands of Gazans and to do it safely and securely.
All right. Ahmed, Yaakov makes a point about Hamas stealing the aid. They are stealing still almost all of the aid. We have had a lot of goodwill in the region. The Saudis, the Egyptians and others, they would like to help in Gaza. If Israel was in charge of the security situation, can you see a scenario where people from those countries would be the ones facilitating aid to the Gazans? Because we go back to the original point, don't we? Who will take the guns away from Hamas? Because, as we can see, they are not going to disarm on their own.
To Arab officials throughout the region, I hear their frustration that they want to be part of the day after, but they're not going to, A, fight Hamas on behalf of Israel, and B, they're not going to basically accept to be co-partners, joint partners in a direct military occupation run by Israel. And so the problem is the only viable body that the Arabs, the international community, are willing to work with are some framework of the Palestinian Authority. They're capable of having some role after Israel clears and holds areas. And unfortunately, we see a decision yet again by the Israeli cabinet, by Mr. Netanyahu, to refuse any return or role for the Palestinian Authority in a post-Hamas Gaza, because that brings about the prospects, or to him, the specter of the two-state solution reemerging as a viable pathway forward. And so even once you clear out Hamas, even once you get rid of most of the guys with guns and you reduce them down to a few a few guerrillas here and there, who is going to run security once the IDF withdraws from the heavy populated areas? Who's going to make the Arabs, the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Emiratis comfortable in coming in and really beginning the transformation that Gaza needs? And that needs to be answered before you embark on the operation, before being critical, because once you're sucked into the quagmire of further military occupation into Gaza, you're going to be dealing with the day-to-day issues associated with that. And I worry that it's not going to create space for strategic thinking. And so that's what concerns me about this. This isn't a strategy. There's no strategy. It's a hodgepodge of let's try it as we go. And Herzi Halevi said one thing and the prime minister didn't like it.
But there is an argument that Israel has tried several ways to defeat Hamas. And there's a big discussion here about using the aid as a way to try and pressure Hamas. And that has quickly been reversed because it didn't work. But nobody seems to have a solution over how to get Hamas out of Gaza.
Well, I think there can be a way to get Hamas out of Gaza. The problem is look at the Egyptians themselves said it. It took them 10 years since the 2013 to get to a place where they've really, truly gotten rid of the Muslim Brotherhood. And look at the insurgency in Sinai. And that's flat terrain with no tunnels, no infrastructure. Look at how long it took the United States to deal with the insurgency in Iraq. Like, there's no magic wand that you can wave, particularly in an urban environment like Gaza, particularly with a ruthless terrorist organization like Hamas that has weaponized the entirety of the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And so, you look at David Petraeus and the famous, clear, hold, and build. Unfortunately, Israel clears, holds, and leaves. That building.
Well, they're now talking about doing the opposite, Ahmed.
They're talking about
doing the opposite to clear, hold, and leave. Now they're talking about clear, holding, and staying there.
Well, but that's the hold phase, right? There's no building in the strategy because I don't think the idea.
All right, Ahmed, give me 1 second. Let me just get a quick word. Sorry to interrupt you. Very quickly, Yaakov, and then we have to move on.
First of all, I agree that there has not been enough strategic clarity on the need to hold and then to build. I completely agree. I've been calling for months for that kind of strategy to be put forward, of not leaving areas, of holding them, and then putting forward a strategy for what I believe is going to be a Gazan autonomy. Now, how is that autonomy going to look like? How will we recruit Egypt and Jordan and the very wealthy and powerful and important Gulf countries? These are critical questions that absolutely the cabinet is going to have to answer. But I think, first of all, let's get past the next decision. Are we going to take the rest of Gaza or not? This is what's on the table. I absolutely agree that the time is long overdue for a conversation about building, holding, and building. I completely agree.
All right. Yaakov Lappin and Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, we appreciate it. Thank you very much to you both.